Thanks for joining us today. I'm Cody Holmyuk. We are 1 week closer to November 8th. The registration deadline passed last week in Missouri, so everyone who can vote there is locked in. And we're committed to making sure you're informed and ready to go ahead of Election Day. Did you know that there's an amendment on the ballot for all Missourians that only really affects Kansas City? It all has to do with state control of our police department and funding. First, a little background here. Kansas City is required to spend 20% of its general revenue on KCPD, which is operated by a state-run Board of Police Commissioners. Anything more than that can be negotiated. Last year, Mayor Quinton Lucas lost an effort to move some $42 million from KCPD's coffers for other crime prevention efforts. It sparked a legislative push that came to a head in June when Missouri Governor Mike Parson signed a bill into law calling for another 5% of funding, millions and millions of dollars more. But it can't happen unless Missouri voters open the door for lawmakers to raise the ceiling. City's still suing the state about this, and Mayor Lucas told me during our Heart of the Matter conversation this summer that the move is a political ploy since the money is already going to KCPD.
We have a budget allocation, right, that already is from Kansas City, 25% of our budget that funds the KCPD. So first of all, that legislation does nothing to actually change protecting our officers, helping us hire more officers. I think the other thing, though, that's important for us is to make sure that we're actually spending money well. It is not a question of how much money sometimes is going in. It needs to be money that's going in to protect people.
Now, the mayor claims there's nothing in this amendment that would lead to pay raises or new hires. He says this push is wrong for Kansas City. Measure will be known as Amendment 4 on the ballot. And again, all Missouri voters have a say in this, even if they don't live in KC. You know, we've been discussing this budget battle for a while with Alan Rostrom, professor with the UMKC School of Law. So we welcome him back. Good to have you again.
Thank you.
You know, I know KCPD is technically state run, right? But it feels strange, almost objectively, for someone in Cape Girardeau to weigh in on a Kansas City issue. Is that fair? Are there any other organizations that would be affected by this amendment?
No, I mean, it's very unusual. Kansas City is the only place in the state of Missouri that has this state control of the police department, and I think it might be the only major city in the United States that doesn't have, local control over its police in this way. So it is very unusual.
Have you seen any messaging to voters in maybe even other parts of the state? Do you think people will even know what this is about when they see this on the ballot?
I haven't. I've had a few trips to Jefferson City and that sort of thing recently and been out on the highways, and I'm not seeing signs about it. I don't really hear advertising about it, so I would be surprised if a lot of people even know what it's about.
Do you think that this passes with that known? Because many times if you see something on a ballot, I'm just speaking for myself, but I see something I don't know about it, I'm maybe hesitant to approve it.
Yeah, the studies I've seen recently have suggested that when people don't know what a ballot measure is about, they have a more and more of a tendency to just say no. Maybe people are fed up with politics or the process or whatever, or too many ballot measures, but they have a tendency to say no. But on the other hand, this is something where it's about police funding. So if you just see that, oh, we're going to increase the police funding, for a lot of people, they might think that sounds pretty good. And if they do understand what it's about, this is really a clash between the more conservative political interests at the state level and Kansas City being a more liberal city. And so overall, the state's fairly conservative. So you might think it would pass on that basis.
What's the number one thing that you want people to know about this amendment?
Well, I think just first of all, that it's really such a political thing. It really isn't about how much money gets spent on the police. Reasonable people could disagree about whether it's better to spend on traditional policing or alternative strategies like Mayor Lucas and the city council here would want, things more geared to mental health and social services and that sort of thing. It's really less even a debate about how much will get spent. I think Kansas City's willing to spend the money. It's just sort of a matter of what it gets spent on, and it's a matter of who will have the power over this. Is it going to be at the local level, where again it's more democratic and more liberal, or will it be at the state level, where statewide Missouri's pretty Republican and conservative?
Just another chapter in the power struggle, you think?
Yeah, it essentially is. I mean, it's true in a lot of states. Their cities will be more liberal than the state overall, and this is just another example of that clash that's produced.
So let's say this passes, right? 25% because of what the governor signed in June. Would become the new statutory minimum for the KCPD budget. What is to stop the state legislature from then increasing this? Because this amendment opens the door. It's 2 pages long. It's a very short amendment. It doesn't set a limit, does it?
No, there'd be no reason in the future. I mean, now it would be raised to 25%, which again is what Kansas City approximately had been spending in the past anyway. They've been going beyond the 20% voluntarily. And there's really nothing that would say they couldn't increase it beyond that in the future. I think they would probably say, oh, no, we don't have an interest. We're just trying to maintain the status quo, essentially. But there's nothing, legally or that would prevent it from going further.
Flip side of the coin, what's the likelihood of this ever being reversed? pretty slim, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, for example, Kansas City's been under this state board of police commissioners since 1939, and the explanation everybody gives is the corruption of that era, the Pendergrass political machine and the Prohibition era corruption. That was a long time ago.
Nearly a century ago,
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure there were problems, but that was a long time ago, and I don't think there's any particular reason to think that there's always a risk of political corruption, but that could occur at the state level as well as the local level. I don't think there's anything that suggests there's a much greater risk of lawless corruption at the local level in Kansas City than there would be, and yet we still have this state board of police commissioners.
Right, been around for, like you said, ages. Does this set up any sort of formal conversation about pushing Kansas City toward actually having control of its own police department, and how likely is that to happen? What would need to happen for that to become reality?
Well, it happened for St. Louis. It used to be Kansas City and St. Louis had this kind of state control and a state board of police commissioners, and there was a measure that passed on the ballot some years ago that removed St. Louis from that. So we're left with just Kansas City. I mean, since then, though, things have become even more political and partisan. The phrase defunding the police gets brought up in this, and it's debatable whether that really is a good description of what's happening. It's more shifting and prioritizing than maybe defunding. But nevertheless, when you're in that environment where that's so controversial, it's hard to imagine a measure being passed statewide that would say, oh yeah, we'll let Kansas City, we'll shift control over the police in this major city back to a government that's more liberal, that maybe a lot of people in the state don't trust as much.
Sure, but as you said, it's happened before, so we'll be watching closely. We appreciate your analysis. Alan Rostrom with UMKC, thank you so much.